Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be filming these sessions that are going to be viewed by students and pastors and church leaders and worship teams and people all over the world, really. And I'm so glad to have you in the room so we can have some live interaction and have some excitement and some energy in the room. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciated it. It was Mother's Day 2013. I had been serving in a church in New York for 13 years. And during the last several months of that time, God was just shifting the desires of my heart. And through the years of life, I have learned that something's happening here. There's a signaling going on. There's a shifting going on. I've seen it happen in so many seasons of my life, and I've seen it happen in other lives, because this is how God leads people who are in relationship with Him. Matter of fact, I believe that's what Psalm 37:4 is saying. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. In other words, you stay engaged in relationship with God, and He leads you by putting desires in you. The giving is the putting. And this has happened in different seasons, and it was happening again. And I just got to a real desperate point, because it was so much of what I was doing in ministry was sucking the life out of me. And I'm like, something's going to change, and I don't know what it is. And God, I need to hear from you what it is. And so my antennas were up. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I was desperate, and I knew my antennas were up. Mother's Day 2013, I am in our sanctuary, 7:30 a.m. Large sanctuary, no one else in the room, getting ready for 3 services that we would have on a Sunday. And I was walking up the staircase, so it was inside the sanctuary staircase. I was going to the balcony up to the tech booth to get things turned on. I was halfway up the staircase, and I heard these words as clear as day. You've done what you can do here. Wow, I was not expecting that. And I was stunned. I'm like, really, Lord? I mean, it was so clear. It was like God's thoughts interrupted my thoughts. It wasn't a God-inspired thought of mine. It was like His thoughts, His voice, His thoughts interrupting my thoughts. And honestly, I'd never heard God like that before. And I'm like, okay, God, do you have something else you'd like to tell me right now? Because that's not a whole lot to go. That's not a whole lot to go on. So all that morning, 3 different services, I'm listening. Nothing. Is someone going to come and have a confirmation word? So nothing's coming. So Monday morning, the next morning, I am in my traditional place where I have my set aside time with God. And I'm just kneeling there, and I'm saying, God, just please say something. Just please say something. What are you saying here? And an hour later, just nothing like I had heard the day before. And I went up to the bathroom to get ready to go into the office. And as clear as day, I heard God say, I've called you to serve my church. Serve me by serving my church in the area of worship. And all that I've poured into you, you've poured out here. And now I need you to give it somewhere else. I'm like, wow. Okay, that was pretty clear. That was pretty clear. So honestly, I can't remember at what point I started talking to Brenda about hearing these words. So that was Monday. I'm sure somewhere in there I talked to her, because it was getting serious now. Tuesday went by, and nothing else came. Then Wednesday morning, I was in my set-apart spot early Wednesday morning, and just listening, and clear as day, I heard these words. I've given you a message from my church, and I'm positioning you so that message will have a greater influence. And I'm like, all right, this is it. So I told Brenda, and literally the next day I told my pastor, because we were having a meeting. And he's like, wow. I'm like, yeah. And 2 weeks later, we announced it to the congregation because of some other circumstances were going on. We were going to announce it sooner than later, even though there was no plan. I mean, there was no plan. There was no job waiting. There was no plan. And it's like I didn't officially resign, but now the whole church, I mean, I had to call my entire choir, my orchestra, my other musicians, my key people in sound and drama, all those people I called before we announced it. All the other pastors, I met with them one-on-one before we announced it that 2 weeks later. And it was just a stunner for all of us. It was a stunner for all of us. And it ended up being an 8-month period that we were still on staff there, just waiting. What's going to happen? Are they going to find someone to replace me? Is God just going to say, okay, now's the time, go? Is someone going to call me and say, oh, this is it, this is it? So anyway, long story, 8 months later, we were packing up the house, and we just felt like there were, to come to the state of Minnesota in the Twin Cities is an area where we had a lot of networking, even though we've been gone for quite a while. So we moved back to the Twin Cities of Minnesota to start this ministry that we now call Worship is Life. And here we are, 4.5 years later from when we moved, over 5 years later from when God spoke those words. And it's just been an amazing, amazing journey. And it's our personal story of what God is calling us to say to the church in how to live. And so I'm so excited to unpack these sessions for you in that. I felt in this first session, we should look at our history in Christianity, in Christian worship, in the church, for a few reasons that I'll unpack as we go along here. So we're going to look at the history of the church and Christian worship. I've given you a little of my history, a little snapshot into it. I'm going to give you a little more of my history. Serving, as a worship arts pastor for 30 years in 3 different congregations. And then I am a real person. I do have a family as well. There's my real family. And there's my wife, Brenda. We have served in life and in ministry together for many, many, many wonderful years. And we met at North Central University in Minneapolis. And I finished school in 1985, and we were married the February following in 1986. And she is just the greatest helpmate that I could be blessed with. And we've been in life and ministry all these years. On her right is our daughter, Kelsey. And then that is her husband, Ben. So Ben is a pastor, and they serve together in full-time ministry. And then that is our son, Taylor, and he is a worship arts leader serving in full-time ministry and currently wrapping up his education at North Central University. So we have been blessed to live life in ministry together, and it's been a tremendous honor and a tremendous blessing. And this is a little bit of our history, and that was our life until God put this call on us to start this ministry we call Worship is Life. So these teachings, these insights are both a culmination and a continuing revelation of a life with God. I'd like to share with you just the mission statement of our ministry. And it's growing God's kingdom through connecting worship to life. So there's 2 questions that form all of these teachings that I'm going to be sharing with you, that form all of these sessions. And it's these 2 questions. What is the connection between a worship service and a life of worship? And why does it matter? And that's where the mission statement comes from. Growing God's kingdom through connecting worship to life. And here's our vision statement. It is to bring the worship is life message to the body of Christ on every continent. And it's just been amazing, the doors that we've seen open to start bringing this vision into fulfillment. So in the last while, I've traveled all over the country. As to date, I've been to Africa 3 times. This coming fall, going to Europe. We're starting to see doors open into the Latin community and into the Latin world. We've got some good connections into the Asian world. And these teachings have potential to go all around the world. Maybe they're the only way that we'll get to Antarctica. I don't know. I want to get to Antarctica, but we'll see what unfolds with that. But this is our vision statement, to bring the worship is life message to the body of Christ on every continent. And I'm so thrilled that you are listening and that you are listening to be a part of the fulfillment of this vision. So the history of the church and Christian worship. When I was working on my master's in worship studies, we took an entire semester on the history of Christian worship. So this is not a history class. I am not a history professor, so I'm going to be making very broad strokes as we go through this. But then towards the end, I'm going to key in on 3 time periods in particular to give us some context for where we are today in Christian worship and how that connects to worship is life. Perhaps some of you will have your curiosity sparked to look further into the places and the people and the events that will be brought up. For those of us who can become a little bored with the past, allow me to mix in some mystery with our history. We all readily accept that last year is in the past, next year is in the future, and this year is the present year, right? Pretty simple, right? Last month is in the past, next month is in the future, and this month is the present month. Yesterday is in the past, tomorrow's in the future, and today is the present day, right? No problem. Easy to comprehend, easy to understand. But what happens when we break time down moment by moment? Where's the present? When are we actually in the present? Oh, well, I'm in the present right now. Oh, wait, no, that moment's gone. Oh, but wait, no, that's gone. Oh, so the present is coming from the future. All right, so here it comes. There it is, grab it. Oh, it's gone. Isn't that crazy? Like we feel like we're always in the present, but are we ever in the present? You know what I'm saying? The point is this. All of time is connected. All of time is connected. All of these people that we're going to be quickly going through, events that we're going to these periods of history that we put into these little compartments, we are connected to all of these moments. We are connected to all those people. All of time is connected. It's a mystery, but it's a reality. So when we look back at history, it's easy to look at periods of time and put them in compartments, but in reality, all of time is connected. And the acceptance of the mystery of time can be helpful when we look at the beginnings of the church and Christianity. So speaking of mystery, let me share with you another ancient truth, and that is this. There is nothing new under the sun. Okay? Ecclesiastes 1:9. Now, when I read that verse, very familiar verse, nothing new under the sun. Lots of people are familiar with it. But when you think of that, it's like, okay, so history, tradition tells us that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. So Solomon, what were you saying when he said there's nothing new under the sun? I mean, just look back at our past. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff that happened, and there's a lot of new stuff. So so I was just looking at Ecclesiastes, and I was just looking at the whole book, the whole writing of Ecclesiastes, and I just saw these ancient truths that Solomon was talking about, that he was fleshing out verse by verse. When you get down into the weeds of it, you don't see it. When you look up and look at the whole thing, here's what I see that Solomon was saying. The nature and character of God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God created us for relationship with Him and relationship with others. Humanity of today is the same as humanity of the past. Just as broken, just as needy of redemption and restored relationship, trying to figure life out just the same as we are all the time. And the dynamics that fuel our brokenness are the same today as they have been from the beginning. And we're going to break that down as we move forward. And the last is, God as Redeemer invites every person to return to intended relationship with God and others. That's what Solomon was saying when he says there's nothing new under the sun. Those ancient truths are always the same. Now, historians would say that church history, or the history of the Christian faith, began around 30 AD. This is obviously marked by the time in history when God came in the flesh in the person of Yeshua, the Messiah, whom we call Jesus the Christ. So as we quickly go through these periods of history, try to keep these two things in mind. First, when God revealed Himself to us in the flesh, in the person of Jesus, it was connected to all the ways God had revealed Himself through history up to that point. While it's impossible for us to fully perceive it, all of time is connected. Second, the original followers of Christ were primarily Jews who grew up in the Hebrew faith. They didn't go to sleep one night as Jews and wake up the next morning as Christians. At least not the way we would define those two. All of their lives, these men and women had learned how to relate to God in a certain way. And now they were learning a new way to relate to God, and it was rocking their world. Think about it. All they ever knew, all their ancestors ever knew is God is one. The Lord our God is one God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The Lord our God is one God. And now, here's God in the flesh in the person of Jesus. I and the Father are one. I am in Him. He is in me. I mean, forget us trying to get our minds around that. Can you imagine that culture trying to get their minds around that? I and the Father are one. So it was rocking their worlds. And as they began to learn how to relate to God in this new way, that started rocking the rest of the world. And this is what the day of Pentecost was all about. Before this time, God would breathe His Spirit, His breath, His life on certain individuals for a certain length of time at certain points in history. But now, because of the complete work of Christ, His life, His death, and resurrection, on the day of Pentecost, everything changed. Now, every person who responds favorably to the revelation of God becomes the dwelling place of the Spirit of God, the breath of God, the life of God. We can look back through history and see how this impact has spread all around the world. So the first period of time we're going to look at is the Apostolic Age, which is from 30 AD to 100 AD. This period extends from the day of Pentecost to the death of the Apostle John and covers about 70 years. The field of action is Palestine and gradually extends over Syria, Asia Minor, Greece, and Italy. The most prominent centers are Jerusalem, Antioch, and Rome, which represent respectively the mother churches of Jewish, Gentile, and United Catholic Christianity, which that just means universal. Catholic means universal Christianity. Next to those centers are Ephesus and Corinth. Ephesus acquired a special importance by the residence and labors of John, which made themselves felt during the 2nd century through Polycarp and Irenaeus. Through the eunuch converted by Philip, it reached Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. As early as AD 58, Paul could say, "From Jerusalem and round about, even unto Illyricum, I have fully preached the gospel of Christ." He afterwards carried it to Rome, where it had already been known before, and possibly as far as Spain, the western boundary of the empire. Now, it's difficult to know how the worship practices of the earliest Jewish disciples carried over into the liturgical life of the earliest Christian communities. The most we can say is that synagogue worship in the first century contained readings from the Torah and the prophets, the Shema, and a form of prayer containing a variable number of sections. Both Jews and Christians read scripture at their services and had traditions of prayer at their sacred meals. The Didache, or the teaching of the 12 apostles, reached its final form by the end of the first century. The Didache contains the clearest example of some early Christian practices related to Jewish worship. After the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, Christian and Jewish worship continued to develop independently. The New Testament bears witness to the fact that the worship of the early church included psalms, doctrinal hymns, spiritual songs, doxologies, confessions and creeds, readings, thanksgivings, and prayers. In the second part of this session, we will move swiftly through the rest of the time periods and then make some connections between three particular time periods that still have significant influence on where the church is today. Worship permeates all of history because worship is life.